Let's start. Number 1. The funeral director slides a sheet across the desk with a line item for embalming, and nobody questions it. It feels medical, it feels official, it feels like the kind of thing a government agency decided decades ago, and your job is simply to pay for it. Here's the reality. Embalming is not required by law anywhere in the United States for a standard domestic burial or cremation. Not federally, not in any state. It is an elective cosmetic service wearing the costume of a public health mandate. The FTC Funeral Rule, established in 1984 and updated in 1994, explicitly prohibits funeral homes from telling families that embalming is legally required unless it genuinely applies, which only covers narrow situations like certain long-distance transport by commercial carrier or specific infectious disease protocols that affect a small fraction of all funerals. For the overwhelming majority of services, refrigeration is a perfectly legal and dramatically cheaper alternative. It preserves the body adequately for a standard viewing window and costs a fraction of what embalming runs. And here's the part they never mention in that hushed, respectful tone. Embalming does not permanently preserve anything. It delays decomposition for roughly 1 to 2 weeks. That is the entire scope of the service you are being charged $500 to $900 for. The practice became culturally embedded in the United States after the Civil War, when bodies needed to travel long distances home from distant battlefields. That was a genuine logistical problem. It has not been the average person's logistical problem for over a century, yet the pricing never got the memo. Embalming sits near the top of the funeral home's margin sheet for good reason. It is a high-ticket service that most families accept without question, because declining it feels like choosing something lesser, something disrespectful, something that requires an explanation nobody wants to give while they are already in pieces. Telling a grieving family that embalming is legally required is the equivalent of a mechanic insisting your car needs 3 separate diagnostic procedures before a routine oil change. It sounds technical, it sounds necessary, and it is almost never true. Number 2. You walk into the showroom and the caskets are lit like museum exhibits, each one with a small placard and a price that makes you do quiet math in your head. The layout, the lighting, the coordinator standing nearby with a patient expression, all of it builds toward one unspoken conclusion. This is where you buy the casket. This is the only place. That conclusion is worth thousands of dollars to them and costs you every cent of it. You can legally purchase a casket from any third-party retailer, and the funeral home is federally required to accept it without charging you a handling fee or a penalty of any kind. The FTC Funeral Rule makes this explicit. Any funeral home that tacks on a casket handling fee when you bring in an outside purchase is in direct violation of federal consumer protection law, full stop. Costco has sold caskets since 2004. Their prices typically range from $900 to $1,500. The national average for a comparable casket purchased through a funeral home showroom runs from $2,000 to $10,000. The caskets are frequently manufactured in the same facilities. The only thing that changes between the factory and the showroom is the markup applied at the door, which funeral industry studies have consistently found averages between 200 and 300% above wholesale cost. Online casket retailers routinely guarantee delivery within 24 to 48 hours, which fits comfortably within standard funeral planning timelines. When families mention buying elsewhere, funeral homes sometimes raise vague concerns about delivery reliability or implied quality differences. The FTC specifically identifies these tactics as potentially deceptive. There is no structural difference between a showroom casket and its third-party equivalent when they come from the same production line. Buying a casket from the funeral home's showroom because you assumed you had to is like walking past a hardware store to pay 4 times the price for the same drill at a boutique. The product is identical. The markup is the entire business model, and the only thing keeping you in that showroom is an assumption nobody ever bothered to correct. Number 3. You sit down with the arrangements coordinator and they walk you through the options. The packages have names that sound dignified and considered, tiered presentations delivered in a measured tone that implies these are simply the available choices. What never comes up unless you already know to ask for it is the lowest cost option the funeral home is legally required to offer you. The FTC Funeral Rule mandates that every funeral home providing cremation services must make a direct cremation option available, and every home providing burial must offer immediate burial. These are the stripped down lowest cost packages, and they are required to appear on the general price list that any funeral home must provide to anyone who requests it, in person or by phone. The problem is that the general price list is only presented when asked. Families are rarely told to ask, and the showroom environment is not designed to point you toward the cheapest column. Direct cremation covers basic transportation, required permits, and the cremation itself with no viewing, no formal service, and no additional preparation. It typically costs between $700 and $2,500. A full-service funeral with cremation averages $6,000 to $12,000 nationally. That gap does not reflect a proportional difference in what is actually being done to or for your loved one. A 2020 report by the Funeral Consumers Alliance found that when researchers called funeral homes requesting pricing information, a significant percentage failed to disclose their lowest cost options without being specifically and directly prompted. Some homes structure their consultation materials so that budget options are absent from brochures, absent from visual displays, and absent from the conversation unless a family arrives already knowing what to demand. There is no legal requirement to hold a viewing, no legal requirement to hire staff for a ceremony, no legal requirement to use the funeral home's facility for a memorial at all. The menu has a value section. They just never flip it over, and the average family sitting in that room has no idea the page exists. Number 4. Even families who have firmly decided on cremation somehow end up standing in a casket showroom. The coordinator nods and explains that a proper container is required for the process. You are already exhausted, you are already making 100 decisions, and a $3,000 mahogany box somehow becomes part of a conversation it has no business being in. No state in the United States requires a casket for cremation. Crematoriums are legally required to accept what the FTC calls an alternative container, which can be an unfinished wood box, a pressed fiberboard container, or a heavy-duty cardboard unit. The FTC Funeral Rule specifically mandates that any funeral home offering cremation must make an alternative container available to families. These containers typically cost between $50 and $200. Cremation caskets sold through funeral home showrooms can run from $1,500 to $5,000 and perform no different function in the cremation process than the cardboard alternative. The crematoriums cannot legally refuse a body presented in a compliant alternative container, and any funeral home suggesting otherwise is either misinformed or banking on the fact that you will not check. The real mechanism at work here is emotional. Families associate a casket with dignity, and choosing cardboard feels, in that moment, like making the wrong choice about someone they loved. The industry understands this and prices accordingly. There is also a middle option worth knowing, the rental casket. It is a fully presentable decorative outer shell with a clean disposable interior insert that is swapped between uses. Families get a traditional looking presentation for a viewing, and then the actual cremation proceeds in the compliant interior at a fraction of the cost of purchasing a permanent casket. This option exists, it is legitimate, it is sanitary, and it is almost never the first thing mentioned in the arrangement conversation. Selling a $4,000 casket for a cremation is like booking a first-class seat on a 20-minute flight. The destination is identical. The experience concludes before it registers. The only thing that changes is the number at the bottom of the invoice. Number 5. The coordinator speaks in a carefully measured tone about the importance of closure, about the family needing the chance to say goodbye properly, about how a viewing provides something irreplaceable for the grieving process. By the time the conversation ends, Skipping it feels less like a personal choice and more like an act of emotional failure. There is no psychological, religious, or legal requirement for a viewing. Grief research does not support the claim that seeing the body is a necessary component of healthy bereavement. What research consistently identifies as meaningful is ritual, not a specific format. And there is no data indicating that a formal viewing at a funeral home produces better grief outcomes than any other form of commemoration. The Association for Death Education and Counseling and related bodies have published work confirming that personalized memorial experiences, not necessarily body-present viewings, are what support people through loss. Many of the world's major religious and cultural traditions either limit or prohibit extended viewings entirely. Islamic tradition calls for rapid, simple burial. Traditional Jewish practice similarly emphasizes speed and restraint. These communities do not report worse bereavement outcomes. A direct cremation followed by a separately organized memorial held at a home, a park, a meaningful outdoor location, or a place of worship can be arranged by the family at minimal cost and shaped entirely around what actually mattered to the person who died, not around what fits in a rental room between 2 and 4 on a Tuesday afternoon. From a financial standpoint, a traditional viewing adds between $1,000 and $3,000 to the total cost. When facility rental, extended staff hours, preparation requirements, and the upgraded display casket are factored together. Funeral homes earn some of their highest per-event revenue from viewings precisely because the format bundles multiple high-margin services into a single emotionally weighted moment. The viewing is the extended warranty of the funeral industry. It is presented as something responsible people do not skip, the pressure lands at the worst possible moment, and the majority of people who decline it report feeling entirely at peace with the decision. Number 6. Near the end of the arrangement conversation, the coordinator helpfully produces a list of recommended vendors: florists, monument engravers, obituary submission services, grief counselors. It feels like a professional courtesy, a curated collection of trusted local businesses built up through years of quality referrals. It is frequently something else entirely. Funeral home vendor referrals are often driven by undisclosed financial arrangements, referral fees, preferred vendor contracts, and revenue sharing agreements that the family is never told about and that no current regulation requires the funeral home to disclose. The FTC Funeral Rule, despite governing many aspects of funeral pricing and disclosure, contains no requirement that funeral homes reveal kickback arrangements with third parties, leaving a documented gap that benefits the industry and nobody sitting across that desk. The monument and headstone category is one of the most heavily documented areas of abuse. Funeral homes and cemeteries routinely refer families to affiliated dealers at markups of 200 to 400% above what an independent granite supplier charges for a structurally identical product. Obituary services are a growing revenue line. A funeral home may charge $200 to $500 to place an obituary that involves nothing more than copying family-provided text into a newspaper submission portal or online form, a task the family could complete in under 10 minutes at little or no cost. Flower referral arrangements between funeral homes and local shops are common enough to have their own industry terminology. The family pays a premium rate, the florist returns a percentage to the home, and the arrangement is invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. Some grief counseling referrals operate within similar structures, with homes holding contractual or financial relationships with the counselors they recommend to families who are, by definition, at their most vulnerable. Consumer advocacy organizations, including the Funeral Consumers Alliance, have pushed for mandatory disclosure requirements for years. The regulatory framework has not caught up. A funeral home's preferred vendor list is not a community resource, it is a revenue map. The only stars being counted are on the referral agreement, and yours is not among them. Number 7. Cremation gets discussed. Traditional burial gets a full-tiered walkthrough with package names and price points, but immediate burial, placing the body in the ground shortly after death, without embalming, without a viewing, and without a formal funeral home service, almost never surfaces unless you already know it exists and ask for it by name. Direct burial is a fully legal, fully available option in every state that can reduce total funeral costs by 60 to 80% compared to a conventional service. The FTC Funeral Rule requires that direct burial be listed on the funeral home's general price list if the home offers burial at all. But the GPL is only presented when requested. Most families are never told to request it, and direct burial does not generate the revenue that a traditional service does, which shapes how prominently it features in any arrangement conversation. Direct burial typically covers transportation, required permits, and interment in a purchased plot. Total costs generally fall between $1,500 and $4,000, against a national average of $8,000 to $12,000 for a conventional burial with a full service. A memorial, if the family wants one, can be held separately at any location they choose, at whatever time works for the people who need to attend, at no cost to the funeral home. Several states go further, permitting families to manage their own permits and transportation entirely without a licensed funeral home involved at all. Home funeral guides and state-level consumer organizations publish detailed instructions for the specific process in each state. Direct burial also has deep roots across religious traditions, where simplicity is not an absence of respect, but an expression of it. Traditional Jewish burial and many Islamic practices treat speed and restraint as marks of dignity, not as budget compromises. Consumer research comparing bereavement outcomes across funeral types has not found that elaborate services produce better grief resolution than simpler ones. Direct burial is the off-menu option that costs a fraction of everything else, is legally required to be available, and is almost never the first thing anyone at that table brings up. Number 8. The advanced planning consultant sits across from you with a composed expression, and the pitch is genuinely compelling. Lock in today's prices. Spare your family from making financial decisions while grieving. Handle everything now while you're thinking clearly and have time to consider your preferences. It sounds responsible. It sounds like something thoughtful adults do. Prepaid funeral contracts are among the most complaint-heavy financial products in the death care industry, and the gap between what is promised and what is delivered has generated federal investigations, state enforcement actions, and decades of unresolved consumer harm. A 2021 report from the Government Accountability Office found significant gaps in state-level oversight of pre-need funeral funds. In many states, funeral homes are only required to place 75 to 90% of prepaid funds into a protected trust account, allowing them to retain the remainder immediately as revenue before any service has been performed. If the funeral home is sold, acquired by a corporate chain, or goes out of business before you need the service, pre-need contracts may not transfer cleanly. Families in these situations have faced legal battles to recover funds or been forced to accept dramatically altered terms from the acquiring company. Many pre-need contracts also contain non-guaranteed line items, meaning third-party costs like cemetery fees, monument charges, and obituary placement are explicitly excluded from the price lock. The locked-in price covers less than families understand it to cover. The Federal Trade Commission and multiple state attorneys general have pursued enforcement actions against funeral providers for pre-need fraud, including cases involving misappropriated trust funds and undelivered contract services. There is a straightforward alternative that achieves the same protective goal without any of these risks. Placing equivalent funds in a dedicated savings account or a payable on death bank account keeps the money fully accessible, earns interest, and carries no dependency on any single business remaining solvent. Pre-planning your wishes costs nothing and is genuinely valuable for your family. Prepaying is the part that introduces risk. Prepaying for a funeral is the only major consumer transaction where the business collecting your money might not exist when it is time to provide what you purchased, and they present that arrangement as peace of mind. Number 9. Mention wanting a natural burial, and the room shifts slightly. No embalming, no metal casket, just a biodegradable shroud or a simple untreated box lowered into the ground to decompose naturally. The response tends to frame this as an unusual request, something that requires special cemeteries, special coordination, and probably a premium for all the complexity involved. Green burial is legal in all 50 states. It is not complicated, it does not require a specialized facility in most cases, and because it eliminates most of the high-margin services that compose a conventional funeral, it receives considerably less enthusiasm from the people whose income depends on selling those services. The Green Burial Council, a nonprofit certification organization, lists hundreds of approved providers and cemeteries across the country, a number that has grown substantially since the mid-2000s as consumer awareness increased. The core requirements for a green burial are minimal: no embalming, a biodegradable container, and a cemetery that permits natural decomposition. All three conditions are achievable in most regions without engaging any specialized or premium provider. Many conventional cemeteries already permit natural burial sections without requiring families to use a dedicated green facility, a fact that rarely comes up when green burial is raised in an arrangement conversation. The environmental contrast with conventional burial is significant. Traditional burial in the United States deposits an estimated 800,000 gallons of embalming fluid, 30 million board feet of hardwood, and 90,000 tons of steel into the ground annually. Green burial eliminates all of it. Newer options including alkaline hydrolysis, sometimes called water cremation, and human composting are now legally available in a growing number of states, offering additional low-impact alternatives that most funeral homes do not raise unless asked. Green burial typically costs 30 to 70% less than conventional burial when total service costs are compared, because simplicity is a direct financial benefit, not a reduction in quality. Treating green burial like a niche special request is like a contractor acting baffled when you say you do not want the most expensive option on the material list. The simpler path was always there. It just does not fund the same margin. Number 10. You have chosen the plot. You have selected the casket, and then, near the end of the process, a new line item appears: the burial vault. Sometimes called a concrete liner, sometimes called a grave box. The language varies, but the framing is consistent. This is a legal requirement. This is an environmental protection measure. This is not optional. No federal law requires a burial vault. No state law requires a burial vault. The requirement exists solely because the private cemetery says so, and the reason has nothing to do with environmental stewardship. When wooden caskets decompose, the soil above them settles and sinks, creating surface depressions that make it difficult to maintain cemetery grounds with riding mowers. Vaults prevent that settling. What is being sold to you as a legal mandate protecting the earth is, at its core, a landscaping solution that protects the cemetery's lawn maintenance schedule. Burial vaults are priced accordingly, ranging from $900 for a basic concrete liner to over $5,000 for sealed premium models with marketing language about long-term protection of the remains. The FTC has flagged this protective language as potentially misleading because a vault does not stop decomposition. It supports the ground surface. Those are different things, and the pricing does not reflect the distinction. Green burial cemeteries do not require vaults. The natural settling of soil is managed through plot spacing and surface upkeep rather than underground concrete infrastructure, because that is how soil has always worked when left to its own logic. Families who prefer conventional burial but want to avoid the vault cost can research whether cemeteries in their area permit burial without one, as some do. The vault market generates an estimated $1 billion annually in the United States, produced entirely by a requirement that the cemetery industry invented for its own operational convenience and then described as a legal necessity to the people it was billing. Buying a burial vault because the cemetery requires it is like paying a mandatory fee at a hotel so their housekeeping team has a slightly easier morning. You are solving their problem with your money, under the impression it was the government's idea. Number 11. Death certificates feel official in a way that places them firmly in professional territory. The funeral home handles them as part of the arrangement process. They appear on the invoice as a line item, and the entire thing moves forward without much examination. In most states, the funeral home files death certificates as an administrative convenience, not because they hold any exclusive legal authority that a family member does not. In the majority of states, the person legally designated as being in charge of disposition, which can be a family member rather than a licensed funeral director, can file the death certificate directly with the county or state vital records office. The funeral home's role in the process is largely clerical, collecting the required information, completing the form, coordinating the attending physician or medical examiner signature, and submitting to the relevant office. None of those steps require specialized expertise beyond familiarity with the paperwork itself. Death certificate fees are set by the government and typically cost between $10 and $25 per certified copy. Funeral homes may charge $25 to $75 per copy as a handling fee layered on top of the government cost. That markup is for the service of filing a form. Families should order more certified copies than they believe they will need at the time of filing. Banks, insurance companies, the Social Security Administration, retirement account administrators, and estate attorneys each typically require an original certified copy, and ordering additional copies after the initial filing involves reapplication fees and processing delays that can hold up estate proceedings for weeks. In states with right-to-control disposition laws, which cover the majority of the country, the legal next of kin holds authority over all aspects of disposition and is not legally required to engage a funeral home to exercise that authority. Organizations supporting home or family-directed funerals publish state-specific guides on the exact filing process. The funeral home filing your death certificates is a concierge service. It is available, it saves time, and you are paying for both of those things. What you are not required to pay for is the assumption that only they can do it. Number 12. A loved one dies in another state. The funeral home there presents themselves as immediately necessary. An arrangement conversation begins covering preparation, local services, documentation, and associated fees. Meanwhile, the family is trying to understand how to bring their person home, and somehow the process ends with 2 funeral homes, 2 sets of fees, and a bill that reflects 2 complete service engagements for 1 person. In virtually every situation, you only need 1 funeral home, your local provider at the destination. A local director can coordinate everything, including the retrieval and transport from the state of death, through a forwarding arrangement that costs a fraction of what a full second engagement runs. Forwarding remains is a specific itemized service that any licensed funeral home can perform, and the FTC Funeral Rule requires it to be listed and priced on the general price list. The funeral home at the origin is legally required to release the body to a licensed transporter you designate. They cannot require you to purchase embalming, a casket, or additional services beyond whatever is minimally required for transport under applicable regulations. Some states require a sealed transfer container for air transport rather than a full casket, and compliant transfer containers cost significantly less than a showroom casket. Direct transport companies that specialize in interstate and international body movement can often perform the required preparation and shipping at total costs, well below what a full-service funeral home in the origin city would charge for the same outcome. The family has the legal right to designate their local funeral home as the primary coordinating agent from the first phone call. That single point of contact manages the out-of-state arrangements, selects the transport provider, and consolidates all communication into one relationship, which typically results in clearer pricing and fewer surprise line items. The origin funeral home will frequently present themselves as essential and their preparation services as mandatory before release. They are not. One phone call to your local director can bypass the entire double billing structure. They just never lead with that information. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.